Okay, my name's Dustin Reagan. I work at Clever along with the infamous code boss, Aaron Krause, and Jacob McSwain's back here. I thought I saw Scott earlier, but oh, there's Scott. Hey. So if you're not familiar with Clever, we do custom web app development, database stuff, IoT projects, games, AR, VR projects, all sorts of stuff. And I believe we're hiring, so you should talk to Aaron probably about that, or not that he hires people, but he knows more info about that than I do. Okay, so I don't know barely anything about what I'm going to be talking about. I don't know Ruby, and I don't know much about data anonymization. The only reason I'm talking in this group is because I had to do some data anonymization on a project we're working on, and after some searching around, the best free tool that I found to do data anonymization was a Ruby gem. So this is the only exposure to Ruby I have, so just keep that in mind. And the only exposure to data anonymization. So what is data anonymization? This is from the Wikipedia, so I'm only going to read the first couple sentences. It's a type of information sanitization whose intent is privacy protection. It is the process of either encrypting or removing personally identifiable information from data sets so that the people whom the data describe remain anonymous. So TLDR, it's a data transformation process of randomizing or masking or removing sensitive data. It's typically non-reversible. And most importantly, it enables, most importantly for developers, it enables sharing data without compromising the valuable aspects of the data. So for instance, if you're working on like a medical records application or something like that, you would want to, and you had a source, a source of production data, of real data that you're going to be using, you would want to, anonymize the, patients' names, addresses, tax IDs, et cetera, but you would want to keep the actual relevant medical records data there so you can develop with it. So some use cases for developers, being able to quickly get a data set to develop against from a sensitive or production data set rather than having to mock your own data set. Using a sensitive data set in an unsecured or less secured development environment. So that's something that you often run into is like when you're starting a project, you don't have you haven't yet gotten to all the security aspects of it. You haven't, I don't know, all sorts of things. So in this case, you can be using what normally would be sensitive data in a less secured environment. And again, since I'm new at this, there's probably tons and tons of other use cases which I haven't thought about. And finally, profit, I guess, I don't know. So if anyone else has used data anonymization, I'd be interested to hear like how else, you've kind of used that tech. So why use it during development? As I mentioned before, you can speed up development because now you don't have to create a bunch of mock data. That can take a lot. That can actually take longer than most people realize. Or when you're kind of budgeting a project, that's something that a lot of people overlook. Is we're going to have to spend all this time mocking up a bunch of data. Also, it can help reduce bugs because, again, if you're mocking data, you're usually having to make assumptions about the structure and types of data that you're going to see. So you can make some bad assumptions, and now there's, you develop with those assumptions, and now there's bugs. Possibly most importantly, it can reduce liability for yourself and or your company. And relatedly, can help with regulation compliance. So especially in financial, medical, banking, a lot of different industries have to follow some pretty strict federal and state regulation regarding data, like the data that you can just let developers see, et cetera. So that's an issue there. So I found this pretty nice library or gem. It's data-anonymization. It has two kind of top-level modes, a whitelist mode and a blacklist mode. in whitelist, basically, it's going to, by default, anonymize or randomize every bit of data in your database, or in the tables or collections that you point it to. So everything will be anonymized except for the fields you explicitly mark. Blacklist is just the opposite, so it leaves everything alone except for the fields that you explicitly mark to anonymize. This gem also works, it works with most relational databases, and I think I think there's only a plugin for Mongo. There might be other plugins for document databases, but that's the only one I noticed. So in just a second, I'm gonna just show you kind of how to use it, just some live coding stuff. But if you don't specify, so they have the concept. It has the concept of field strategies, which are just strategies for anonymizing different types of data. And by default, if you don't specify a strategy, it's going to look at your data fields type and pick one of these. So for instance, if it's a string, it's just going to use the random string field strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's a date time, random date time, or it's going to add a delta, some random delta to the date that's there, et cetera, et cetera. So let's actually look at some code. So all right, so I'm just using Mongo just to get some toy data in there really quickly. I have 2 documents in a collection called All the Secrets. So we got Timmy Smith. His secret is he likes turtles. He has Social Security, an array of friends, which is just an array of references to other documents in the collection, and then a secret importance. And then we got Agent 007, a secret. All right, question? Yeah, how do I do that? Is that a little better? Yeah. Okay. All right, so as you can see, Timmy and Agent 007 are friends with each other, right? Okay, so that's some toy data there. Now to look at this code here, so I'm using Mongo, I'm using the data-anonymization gem. I'm going to be anonymizing the data in the anonymized _source DB, and I'm going to send it to the anonymized DB, the collection name, the connection string. All right, so, and then here I'm going to just go ahead and drop all the data in my destination, just so if we're doing it multiple times, there won't be any problems there. Okay, so first of all, I call the database function from the data anonymization gem, give it the source database, and then this do thing, I guess this is essentially kind of like an anonymous function or a function pointer or something. I'm not sure. I don't do Ruby, but so it's going to use the whitelist strategy. So again, it's going to by default anonymize all of the fields in this collection except for ID, _ID. And that's pretty typical. You probably don't want to anonymize you don't want to randomize your IDs. Okay, so when I run that, all right. All right, so I run that, and now in my anonymized database, we can see, okay, the IDs have stayed the same, but everything else is randomized. And it's interesting, I didn't realize this at first, but the default string randomization field strategy, it keeps the fields the same length. So So this was Timmy. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters. It's still 5 characters. It's just randomized. So that's interesting to know. So now let's look at some of the field. So that's nice, but it's maybe not that useful. It depends on what sort of, how you're using this data. Like if you had some web application that you're using it with. So one problem right away that I would see is that, so the friends references have gotten all messed up. Like this guy, yeah, so I mean, they're basically referencing IDs that don't even exist anymore because they've been randomized, right? So that's a problem. So one of the things that you have to do when you're using any sort of data anonymization is actually think pretty carefully about what fields you do actually want to anonymize and which ones you don't, because you can basically mess up your data so that it doesn't work in your application anymore. Also, for instance, like the secret importance, perhaps you had some UI or sorting code in your web app that relied on the secret importance. Now those don't make any sense. Now it's just going to kind of mess up, potentially your web app. So I'm just going to, so first of all, so now we're going to whitelist friends. Just going to show some of these different field strategies here. This is a random first name. Some of these, I think, are, as far as the developer is concerned, are more cosmetic. For instance, like if I'm developing something, I don't really care if the first name is like some random string or a real, human readable first name. But if you're using the same data in like a QA or QA environment or a staging environment, the people QAing it might appreciate that, but yeah, okay, so yeah, let's run it now with these. So sorry, the last one here is interesting. This is a select from list field strategy. So that's basically saying it's going to randomly select an item from the list you provide and apply that. So in this case, we can have a secret of importance of high, medium, or low, just randomly. So let's run that. All right, so now we can see now we have a first name Clarissa, last name Genest, I don't know. So now this data is anonymized yet quite a bit more usable than it was previously, in my opinion. Okay, yeah, this is an interesting one too, the SSN, the social security number. You could see before it was the same length, but each character was completely random. Here, I used the formatted string number field strategy, which will essentially randomize any numbers in your string, but keep any non-number characters the same. Okay, I guess my time's up. Okay. All right. So, I mean, there's also a really nice, handy tool that comes along with the gem to generate one of these scripts if you point it at a database and a collection. So I'm going to just demo that real quick if I can find that. Yeah, there we go. Right. So this is handy, and this is in practice how I've used this is because we have a really large Mongo database for a client that we need to anonymize. So this will go ahead and generate a script, and you just kind of have to fill in some of these values here. But it's looked at the database I pointed it to and looked at all the collections in it and generated kind of anonymization skeleton for all those collections, which is really handy. So yeah, it's a nice little tool. It's pretty easy to use, pretty straightforward. Any questions? All right, that's it.